everyone. How you doing? How are you? Good? Yes? Woo, you're alive! It's Tuesday morning. Woo, that's what I want to hear. Lovely to see you all here. Thank you so much for being here. Of course, it's the Interchange Conference Theatre. There's going to be lots of good stuff happening right here. I am your moderator right now, and if you weren't at the keynote stage, you'll have missed the fact that I was telling everyone my name rhymes with margarine, but please don't be tempted to say that. And that I am deranged enough to get up at 3 in the morning to be on air at 6 in the morning on ITV1's Good Morning Britain most weeks. So, but instead I decided to be here with you guys, having a little lie-in. And I'm also a beer sommelier, so any craft beer, real ale lovers in the room, feel free to stop me, talk about your favourite beers. Let's see if I've heard of them, anything I can suggest for you, all that stuff. Okay, let's get going then. I do need to let you know that this theatre is kindly sponsored by Costain. Thank you very much to them. And Costain is very much, this theatre rather, is really the place for big thinking, thought leadership. This is what we're going to be doing today. And we've also stressed to all of the speakers that you'll see today that we do want them to be real about the current situation and about how they're delivering transformational change. Of course, lots of areas to discuss. The focus is going to be resilience, integrating modes and accelerating the decarbonisation of transport. That's all to come. I do need to go through some more, the same little bits of housekeeping. Apologies if you've heard that before the keynote stage. If you have, just check your emails or something like that. Just give me a few minutes, right? Because I know you'll have work on your mind at the same time as this. Lots going on over the next 2 days, up to 4 conference programs running in parallel. And obviously, I think, though, you should be staying here, right? Not going anywhere else. To help you navigate what's on offer, you'll find lots of on-site signage. There are maps, lots of event helpers in the green hoodies, a printed pocket guide as well, I am told. The stages are all colour coordinated, as is the signage and on the website. That's to help you with your bearings, but really the main source of information is at the website, which is interchange-uk.com. Use that as your guide. Excuse me, it's been optimised for mobile use, and the homepage will show lots of different tiles, those colour-coordinated tiles, so you can navigate around programmes, speakers, delegate list, exhibitors, don't forget our all-important exhibitors, and sponsor profiles. Yes, you can have a look at the speaker profiles. They're filtered by programme and time slot, so definitely get used to using that today and tomorrow to get yourself around here. Now, before we kick off the first session on resilience, it does give me great pleasure to invite to the stage a man who is the Integrated Transport Director for Costain and a member of the Interchange Steering Committee, Andy Clark, to say a few words and to welcome everyone and to contextualise really the ambitions of the next few days. Andrew, thank you.
Thanks, Marvin. And yeah, we'll talk later on around bitter. I'm a bitter drinker, so we'll talk later on about different kinds of drinks. So yeah, welcome everyone, and Costain's delighted to be a partner at Interchange again for the second year running in 2024. We're here today because we are passionate about changing the way that we are delivering our projects and think of infrastructure. We've got to think around the development of an integrated, connected, multimodal transportation system that actually drives benefit for society. But why is that important? I'm going to hear about that today. And that infrastructure is going through unprecedented change and needs to change. The challenges are a growing population, social mobility. You're going to talk in a minute around resilience. And that's climate resilience, environmental resilience, economic resilience. So we need to think of a new response. A new response, one grounded in deeper sector collaboration that's not just highways focused or rail focused or local authority focused. It's one that brings the different modes of transportation together. We've got to look at embracing new technologies as we look to decarbonise. We've got to think about how we deliver infrastructure differently. And in Costain, we set up integrated transport 3 years ago we set out to change the way we think around our infrastructure for transport. Now, today we need to capitalise on the momentum that we had last year. Some great discussions around the why and the what. But as we started to hear next door earlier, now's the time to start talking about the how. And looking at the schedule, there is a wealth of knowledge and experience. And the time's come for those in the room and are here today over the next 2 days start coming together, talking, because we're the ones who are actually going to implement that change and come up with the hows. There's no third party, no person in Westminster who's going to come out with those answers. We're the people who've got the answers. We just need to come together, break down those silos, and look at how we integrate and digitise and decarbonise our infrastructure. So by working together, we can develop that long-term integrated transport plan, which will create a sustainable, lasting legacy that leaves a positive infrastructure outcomes and helps improve people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. Thanks very much indeed, Andy, for that welcome. Yes, lots of challenges ahead. So let's get started about where we're going to run from now until lunchtime. We're going to be discussing the first of our 3 themed sessions today, which is adapting transport systems for resilience. Turns out that resilience is one of those words that people use a lot without thinking too much about what it means. So before our panel discussion starts, and to help us better frame what we're getting at, we do need an address to set the scene. And this is going to be the form of the day. There'll always be some scene setting before we get into discussions. So we have a double header. David Oliver and Sarah Ulrich, who are colleagues at PA Consulting. They're going to explain why we need to make resilience a sustained and strategic priority. David is PA's transport lead, and Sarah leads on transport resilience and wargaming. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Sarah, I hope you're going to tell us all about what that title entails. Please welcome David and Sarah to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marverine, and I'm also half French, half German, so the Weissbier is really my thing.
Yes,
so we can take it offline as well.
We will talk, yes.
And you introduced ourselves very nicely, and thanks all, really warm welcome as well to this resilience exciting stage. So yes, I have a very sexy job title as a wargaming lead, but I'll do all of this for the greater good of resilience and readiness in transport. And I had 3 lives. I used to be an academic as well, for all my sins. I used to teach and train diplomats and military students using some wargaming techniques as well in international negotiations. But also then I had a life in a startup company, and then I came to the dark side of the force in management consultancy. But over to David for more thorough introduction. David?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Who am I? It's always tricky going after Sarah when she runs that introduction because I have very little to say. I did 10 years with PA Consulting. I'm the global head of transport, mostly focused on helping transport organisations make big investment decisions and design themselves to execute them. Prior to that, I did a bunch of time in the civil service for the Home Office, running drug and alcohol policy, working for Theresa May, running her private office. I'm probably the only person who joined management consultancy for reduction in hours. So, so here we go. Right, shall we?
Yeah, sounds good.
So, time to rebuild. Oh, Sarah's moved quickly. She beat me to it. Time to rebuild resilience is a strategic imperative. And I was talking to some of the colleagues who are going to be on the panel earlier on, and actually the urgency of action is a really important thing. And actually seizing the opportunity we have and the time we have to act is really the essence of what we're going to talk about today. And obviously, we've got a black slide up. No, back one. Go on. Oh, is that not you? God, we've got clever animation going. We had a black slide up there. We now don't. The black slide, partly my daughter is doing a bunch of Macbeth, and I've spent too much time debating mood, colours, and what they mean for the world and everyone's feelings. And secondly, it sort of sums up my mood when I think about resilience and when I think about where the industry's got itself to when it reflects on resilience. And why is that? It's partly because we haven't really recovered from the last big event to challenge resilience, to challenge the industry's resilience. Secondly, we haven't spent enough time on our people after that event. And thirdly, actually, we haven't thought long and hard enough about the asset to get it into the right kind of state before we actually move on to the challenge of climate. So, COVID. No more buttons, hopefully. This is why it's a double act. Most people probably hoped there was no COVID presentation at this conference. Yeah, I can see. I'm landing well. This is good today. Actually, the thing about COVID, the industry did an amazing job responding to a sustained crisis for a really long period of time. And we lent really hard on the people in the industry to make that response work. And what we didn't do, I think, is actually take enough time to step back, celebrate what we've done for a coherent and sustained period of time, but also make good what we'd drawn on. So we'd drawn on a massive amount of goodwill from across the workforce in terms of the weak ties that bind people to our organisation. So I think we're now facing into some real big challenges on resilience with a workforce that's actually slightly worn out and denuded of loyalty. Right. So, the networks are back and running. The roads are busy again. This is good, but the asset isn't where we'd want it to be, and actually there's a massive amount of work to get the resilient asset up and running properly, and that level of traffic and sort of jams is typical. The station, it's a very busy station, but it could equally be a very empty train. Both seem to run hand in hand at the moment, and actually that challenge of what system we're running and for what purpose and how it's been designed and set up is really landing hard. And I don't think we've got a workforce that's not massively happy, particularly on the rail side. The industrial relations are playing through. They are hitting our ability to run the systems. And we're doing this constant engineering work, which is, again, damaging the ability to run a coherent and resilient system. And then we come to climate. The climate emergency is coming, and it's going to hit. Those pictures could quite well have been the East Coast Main Line a couple of days ago. It's, mildly flooded now, probably coming up from Peterborough when I did this morning. Actually, it's going to hit. The asset that we've got, lots of Victorian bits to it, is not designed to withstand or stand up to this kind of climate challenge, and it is going to come. And it feels, I guess, that there's an absence of urgency, and that's a real problem, I think. So, you take all these things together, we have a real mix. Each of these issues on their own would merit a really sustained, focused response. The people, the ties to transport, the asset, the state of the asset, the climate response. Actually taking them together means that we have a real imperative and a real need to focus hard on a response at a systems level. Because although, there's a lot of, and slightly we're preaching to the converted and to the choirs here, there's a lot of people who really buy into the need to drive resilience up, and there's a lot of organisations that are doing really good work. It's not happening at a systems level. And actually, the research, which Sarah's going to talk through, one of the killer stats for me, 60% of the executives we surveyed don't think that there's any work to do to improve resilience, which, I disagree with you, we surprise, but that's where thinking has got to. Everyone thinks they're post-resilient, post-COVID. And with that, Sarah?
Thank you very much, David. So just to give you an overview of this research and what we found, because there are certain things that you might recognize in your own transport leadership roles, and there might other things that might surprise you. So it will be interesting after the session to get your views and your sentiment. The very important part is that we looked at exploring how transport leaders, obviously in the last 4 years, how have they coped what were the major lessons learned that could be applied in the future. So it was backwards looking to be able to see what kind of future lessons we can implement in an agenda for change, so back and future. And we surveyed over 360 business leaders, had a lot of interviews, over 25 of them, and this showed that a new type of resilience, an always-on resilience, was needed. And I will explain a bit more what came out from that research. But the three, I would say, main things that came out was resilience as a strategic imperative, as David was pointing out. It is going from basement to boardroom. It is not anymore, and I have seen it many times, and I'm not criticizing it in any way, but it's an interesting progress that you move up in the organization, that it is now a board agenda and a strategic imperative. The second one, it is also much more resilience. What is it? Marvin mentioned that earlier. It can be clustered in so many different components that it is really important to also look at what is the strategic definition of resilience, and that's what COVID and the pandemic has forced us to look at. It is much more broadly defined than just business continuity or crisis management. And again, no offense to those two, because they are vital for organization resilience as well. But it is especially interlinked with cross-functional aspects, big changes in organization and in the ecosystem, such as innovation, technology, and when our panel is going to talk about as well on sustainability and climate. It is not anymore, again, a basement issue. It's something that touches absolutely everything, including financial aspects too. The other thing is, it is always on. What we mean by that is COVID made us realize very quickly, and the transport leaders collaborated that, thought that you cannot stand up, stand down, the operational teams as it used to be. It needs to be a more fluid, permanent state that you have very, very different teams, and again at a strategic levels to make sure it constantly looks at resilience and not always reacting to disruptive events. So that was a very, very important finding of our research. And the last bit, a very interesting one, is that it is, because it went from, sorry, I'm being nasty again, on basement to boardroom, it's really something that is a competitive advantage. We used to look at it that there are certain things that make the competitive advantage of an organization or a department. Resilience is now one of them. It's not only something that you have a side look and you say, yeah, we need it, but it's something that is really, really needed to not only survive what we learned in COVID, but thrive as an organization. So that was the really important bits, and some key stats here was around 88% seeing that resilience is a strategic imperative, 79% saying true resilience needs to be an always-on priority, and also 76% confirmed that they see investment in resilience that can drive a competitive advantage. So that were the major findings of our research. However, and as the black slide of David tried to point out earlier, what is really interesting is that the current momentum gained, in a sense, by COVID and the pandemic, the sense of urgency is waning. It's not considered a priority anymore. So 2/3, so that is also staggering. Let's get it sink in. Sorry, my French. Let's think about that a bit more. 2/3, so 65% have no plans to increase resilience investment today, after having experienced, obviously, the mayhem, the challenges of the last 4 years. Also, very interestingly, is 1 in 4, again, 1 in 4, so 25%, says that more disruptive events that forces us to prioritize resilience. So we need more disruption to justify investing in resilience. Isn't that crazy? Especially after all we went through. But there are reasons to it as well, where we can discuss afterwards too. And in our latest transport mode resilience, it's interesting to have the overlay of the different modes and how there are commonalities, but there are differences too. So all the modes, so aviation, rail, roads, and logistics, what we looked at, all the modes are unanimous in saying their organizational resilience had improved over the last 3 years. Phew, thanks goodness. But there are some differences between modes. For example, rail, and I love you guys, my rail friends, yeah, so please, that's what transport leaders told us. Rail is most likely as a mode to recognize that not being resilient costs more in the long term, so that's a good thing, yet most likely to believe that the worst has already happened. Uh-oh. Then aviation is most likely to see the importance placed on resilience that has waned, so they think actually there is more disruption needed to justify resilience, and they don't see resilience as an opportunity, but as a challenge. You can understand it as well with what they have been going through in the last 4 years. For roads, the interesting aspect is they have the largest uptick in its rating of themselves, that they became better in organizational resilience in the last 4 years. But they're also really looking at themselves and think that they have really a big lack of resilient knowledge and skills. And the last one, just to highlight a few bits, logistics is the most likely to see resilience as being an opportunity, but is also the least dependent mode on disruption as a number one accelerator of resilience, which is interesting to compare that. The next one we wanted to highlight a bit more, I'm not going to touch it again, is that leaders have a critical role to play. So if you can move to the next slide at the back, thanks, gents. Thank you very much. And the next one as well, because I think I talked through those as well. Okay, brilliant. So the leaders have a critical role to play, the transport leaders, in building these switched-on, fluid capabilities that we talked about as often always on resilience. And we have identified 3 key areas that it would be good to focus on. But there is also a 4th one I'm going to share with you today too, because we have seen, especially in the recent 12 months, an interesting trend that you might find interesting. So, embedding a resilience mindset. I know it sounds logical, right? It's about people and culture, and what we have experienced in the last 4 years. It's really heavily dependent, this resilience, on the skills and behaviors of transport leaders at all levels. So we need to set the tone, create a space to find ways to succeed in those disruptions. Trains your resilience muscle, obviously. Marjorie mentioned the sexy job title I have around wargaming. It's really about using certain tools like wargaming, scenario planning, etc., to really make sure that you train that resilience muscle and you really build that muscle memory. It is something that has never been more important because it becomes a strategic imperative. So it's not only operationally, but it's also building the bridge as well between the board, the CXOs, and the operational aspects, that they are completely on the same page when we talk about the transport resilience. And the last one, which I think is one of my favorites, and David, I know we talked often about this, is building a resilient transport ecosystem. It's obviously important that as individual organization, you look at how you can enhance your supplier relationships, but it is even more important that you think, what Andy mentioned as well in the opening, that we think about how can we work more as a transport ecosystem, by modes, but also cross modes. And really, that is really a fundamental thing for us to think about. How can we do that? And the 4th one I mentioned to you earlier is we have seen the need to be obviously more proactive than responsive. And one of the aspects is to combine more and more resilience with readiness. So if you think of resilience around, very simplistically said, what you do not want to happen at an organization level, think about readiness, how to prepare for day one, and what you do want to happen for major programs, big events, big issues that you know are coming up in the future. Combining those two is where the magic happens. So again, food for thought for you as well on combining that. And I'm just going to finish on a few thoughts, David, and then you might want to add your wise words to the end. Is really, I know, and again, I'm half French, but also half German. So my German side would say the time is now to do something about it, and that's really, really important. And really important that we not only think or try to look at our blind spot in thinking that COVID was the worst that ever happened to us. It is the worst that ever happened to us so far, and it is not something we should take lightly in a sense that when you look at what's happening now, I think it is starting to become the worst we have seen so far. You have compounded risks, you have perfect storm scenarios, and really it happens across the whole pestle landscape. So it's not only a social issue, an economical issue, it is compounded at the same time across the whole pestle landscape, which is the worrying bit right now. So again, there is also an opportunity here to join together in a transport resilience movement and really think about an agenda for change and how we can do this as an organization, but also as a transport ecosystem. David, over to you for final words.
What have I got left? No, the clicker's given up.
Yeah.
Right. I guess the last thing for me, and it's back to some of the introduction, actually, the big thinking and the joining up that we need to do as a transport industry across the boundaries, I think is ever more pressing. There we go. Seize the momentum, that's the tagline. I think actually events like today and taking the time out to meet colleagues outside of our normal silos, because we're very, very good at staying in our silos and very, very good at thinking we must get out and break them down. Actually seizing that momentum and addressing resilience, be it the climate resilience, be it the workforce challenges, be it the asset, as a whole industry rather than in our silos, I think is really important that we move it fast today. That's it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you
you.
for your attention.
David, Sarah, fascinating research there. So did you get a chance to check the QR code to get hold of that? Because it was extraordinary. Guys, can you just pop that last slide on again, the QR, so people can catch that to download the report? Because some of the stats there, the data from transport organisation leaders was very, very interesting and worth diving into. What we're going to do next then is to ask a panel to join us to help us unpick and elaborate some of those ideas that we've just heard about. So one by one, I'm going to invite our panelists up. So first of all, we have Tom Goodyear, Global Asset Management Lead, WSP. Good morning, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. If you take probably the furthest seat if you can, yeah, because we're going to go around and I'm going to sit here. Paula White, Public Sector Sustainability Solutions, Google Cloud. Thank you. Good morning, Paula. Professor Anusha Shah, UK Climate Adaptation Lead, Arcadis, and also President of ICE. Good morning, Anusha. Theodora Caneva, Head of Smart Infrastructure and Systems, Tech UK. And also, I believe we have Alistair Howcroft, Associate Director, Advisory Services, ARUP. So, Anusha, if you sit next to Paula. Oh, you need to get a microphone. Okay, so we'll leave that gap. Great. So, Theodora there. Yeah, Alistair there. Anusha's going to get mic'd up. Okay, let's begin. I just want to bring some water. Guys, do you want to grab some water if you need it? I'm getting quite dry already, so please go ahead and do that. Right. And also, I want to make sure that I'm actually looking at you a bit more, so turn my chair a bit. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're going to get into conversations, but then there also will be chance for questions. So think about any questions that you have. I do think we're going to have a roving mic situation again. Yes, nod at the back. Thank you, my good man back there. So we'll make time for some of those. First of all, let's find out more about who you are. So please, maybe 3 minutes or so, each of you. I'd really like to understand, and for the audience, who you are, your responsibilities, but also your headline thoughts on what resilience means to you and your organisations. Because given the survey that Pia have just gone through. Very, very interesting thoughts on resilience and the urgency, or not in some cases, around it. So I'm going to start from the left. Tom, would you like to start for me? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anusha. Oh, great. Just in time, Anusha. Great.
Really sorry, I just assumed the mics were actually
No
mic'd
problem.
up.
We're all ready to rock.
Cool. So I've got some, not slides, because we're instructed not to do those, but visual aids to come up. And I guess you guys are going to click through. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Marvin. And kind of as you alluded in your introduction, I'm going to be suitably honest, truthful, and depressed. Right?
Oh, no. No depression here.
About
Try and stay positive.
the resilience of our infrastructure, but also close on a bit of a hopeful note as well. So I'm Tom Goodyear. I'm the Head of Strategic Asset Management at WSP. I'm also our Global Lead for Asset Management. I've had the good fortune to have quite a varied career already. But my time at His Majesty's Treasury is what got me on to asset management. And that's because we were looking for ways to reduce the cost of infrastructure. And the idea was that a better understanding of value, levels of service, risk, performance, all of that is a good way to bring down the cost of infrastructure and improve performance and spend the money better. So I end up talking a lot about risk, prioritization, forecasting, decision-making, and crucially, planning. But the best laid plans and all that. Right, so Mike Tyson put it most succinctly, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right? And the idea that the resilience we're discussing today is all about how well our infrastructure can respond to those punches, and really the ones that we've caused our own climate to throw at us. So we're mostly engineers in this room, I would guess. And so for some of us, it should feel like really simple to deal with the infrastructure challenges. We can just raise the levels, right? We can build better seawalls or HVAC systems. And these are just matters for more conservative engineering assumptions. But we really can't do that, right? I mean, that is not feasible. We can't protect the entire world. So what can we do? And we've seen all sorts of issues with poor resilience of infrastructure here in the UK. But I actually lived in the US for a few years, and what I saw there was something very different. The US has really, really suffered billions and billions of dollars for the major events that have happened. But actually, the regular winter resilience I found really impressive. So I lived in Chicago for 4 years, where the snow and the ice is a real problem. But the highway infrastructure there is designed for it. The highway authorities' depots are full of plows that come out en masse and clear the roads. I was living there during the polar vortex of 2019, which made the news over here, I know. One of the 2 days when it was minus 20 Celsius, I caught a lift with my neighbour into downtown. He drove us in, the roads were clear. And then I caught the train back, and the trains were working absolutely fine. Oh, that sounds good.
Well, do you have slides then, Tom?
Well, I may do. We'll carry on. Anyway, I've got some cool pictures of the polar vortex, but that is fine. The US was really well set up, at least, and that's what I saw across the country. But then, much more worrisome, both here and there, are the changes to those shocks that are happening. And our assumptions are having to change, and really quickly. So the West Coast Main Line, that probably many of us use today, in 2013, the system operator did a review of how much headroom there was in the system. And they decided that there might be one more path per day on the entirety of the West Coast Main Line. By 2020, when they repeated that, that was gone. There is no more opportunity. Oh, here we go. There you go. That was my Mike Tyson.
Okay.
Mike Tyson there. There you go.
There you go.
That was the polar vortex when the Lake Michigan froze over and was steaming. It was incredible. And that's the train home. So in Chicago, they have open flame switch heaters on the rail infrastructure to keep it all warm, to keep the trains running. And there's the West Coast Main Line. So by 2020, that wriggle room on the West Coast Main Line had gone. And so what does that mean for us, right? That there isn't enough headroom in the timetables as it is. We see that small perturbations snowball into horrible impacts on customers, us, when we're traveling. So if we want to be resilient to shocks that happen like this, well, what does that mean? Do we have to accept a lower level of service normally to allow the headroom for shocks? So actually, the resilience of the West Coast Main Line and all the routes for Network Rail is really well studied. All those routes have to assess their vulnerability and use the potential of fines to help prioritize what adaptation measures they undertake. I've been doing some work with National Highways, which is similar. They've been changing their design assumptions to allow for, to include the assumptions about worse flooding, heat, etc. However, the problems with the resilience of our infrastructure, they're not going to be solved by new design standards, as I mentioned before, because they'll only address new or renewed assets. We don't have the time and money for that. The solutions have got to be systemic, and they must address everything to do with how we run our infrastructure. So I've got 3 comments only on that. So when I was in the US, I saw that the US government understood this, and they brought in asset management legislation in 2012, and it forced agencies to prioritize their spending better. This is a really complicated graph, and I apologize for that, but it simply shows that the then current annual spend will result in an increased backlog of work. The condition basically is going to keep deteriorating unless something is changed. Now, new money is not going to be forthcoming, or it wasn't going to be forthcoming. The idea of this was a call to action, right? We talked about urgency of action before. The idea is there is never going to be enough money, so what are you going to do? You've got to start prioritizing better.
Tom, real quick, got to speed you up with your last 2 points.
Yeah, that's fine, right. So close to my heart then was ISO standards. So again, these are systemic, right? The way we run our businesses completely. This is the London Declaration. So now all management system standards require that you plan for climate change. So we all have to be resilient if we want to keep our ISO certificates for any of them. And then finally, and my final hopeful point, is that actually the future workforce is engaged, and they're taking it much more seriously than probably most of us in this room, whether we like it or not. And it may well be too late by then, but the cohorts that are coming through will make our world more resilient in ways we've not managed to yet, I hope.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Paula, your introduction then really, again, just focusing the mind on your responsibilities, but what resilience around the climate means to you and your organisation.
Fantastic. Hi, my name's Paula White. I work for Google Cloud as the technical lead for sustainability, the public sector. I have over 30 years' experience working in digital, and I also studied urban analytics and smart cities in an MSc at UCL. And I was very privileged to serve on the GLA Smart London board. So really fantastic to be here in Manchester. Those initial talks in the exchange just blew me away, the amount of emotion on the topic, and also the previous presentation. So I think we've already heard a lot about all this extreme weather. We've seen amazing photographs of storms and flooding, extreme heat. And these are increasing at unprecedented rates. And for most people, this is how they experience climate change. So the work that we're doing in public sector, my background is very much in data and technology, and so that's our focus. So how do we help organizations make better decisions to improve readiness and also for transformation? And typically, the way organizations would start is they would have to find all of the data inside their own organization. They'd look for data in other organizations. They'd have to prepare that data, process that data. They might commission a big study, and so that's quite an involved piece of work to do. And so one of the challenges is where do we find that data, how do we make sure it's up to date, and how does it help us to solve these problems? So we've only got a few minutes. I don't want to go berserk, so I'm just going to give you a few examples just to give you a sense of some of the sorts of things that are relevant. So I wanted to start with something, I think the big transformation is key, but if we just start where we are today, in the UK there are lots of transport authorities using Waze, and probably a lot of you use Waze. You've got it on your phone as an app, it just helps you navigate around the city. But what you may not be aware of is there's also a Waze for Cities programme. And what that enables is public sector organisations can get free access to anonymised data so they can understand the routes that drivers are taking around the cities. So potentially this can help with things like road closures, diversions, and in a weather scenario it could help with if there was flooding or extreme heat and the roads were suffering, how do we actually react to that quickly? Because transport authorities can also publish to Waze, and so it's a way we can communicate directly with drivers with an application that they're already using. So that's a sort of real-time kind of reactive type scenario. But if we want to look more transformative at some more cutting-edge capabilities, I think Google Earth Engine is incredibly exciting. That was originally announced in 2010 at COP16 for NGOs and scientists specifically for climate research. And what Google Earth Engine is a planetary scale data platform for Earth observation data. It's the biggest open data catalog for Earth observation data. It's got over 60 petabytes of data, and it's all curated and ready to go. And when you use it with the cloud, you can actually ask questions of these huge data sets that you just couldn't ask before. So you can ask questions about land use. You could ask questions about the rail and what sorts of hazards there are on the rail. Is there vegetation that's going to create a risk of fire? You could ask questions about how flooded the soil is, how saturated it is, about weather. So this is transformational because it's real-time data. It's also got 50 years of historical data, so we can combine it with machine learning and predictive analytics. So to take you away from Manchester to Hawaii, they're at the cutting edge of climate resilience, and we've heard a lot about funding already. There aren't many people doing this, but Hawaii are, partly because they have a lot of risks, including volcanoes and lava flow. But what Hawaii have done is they've created an index for all of the roads around the islands. They've got 2,500 miles of roads. 20% of those are exposed to raising sea levels and coastal erosion. So they've used Google Earth Engine to understand that risk and to help the Highways Department come up with short-term and long-term interventions. But they've not just looked at physical assets. They've also looked at the people and the demographics, and they've also plotted where are the vulnerable people who we're going to need to support. And just a quick final one.
Just a quick one.
Very quick one. Is just thinking about the future, we don't just want cities with money to be able to do this. We want to democratize it for everyone. So one example is Climate IQ, which has been funded by Google Org. What they're doing is looking at lots of cities around the world, small, big, different climate contexts. They're using machine learning to model drought, extreme heat, air pollution, and what they're trying to do is then create a general model for all cities and all regions, so agencies and communities can see where to invest, and also, you know, how can they respond to these issues.
Thank you, Paula. A lot going on there in terms of readiness and some open data there. Professor Shah, again, just briefly tell us about yourself, but also where are you taking resilience? What does it mean practically for you now?
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me.
It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm Anusha Shah. I work for Arcadis as a Senior Director for Resilient Cities, and I'm also the UK Climate Adaptation Lead. So by training, I'm a civil engineer. I'm really proud to be one. And my specialization is water environmental engineering, so nearly got 23, 24 years of experience. Gosh, or maybe 25. God, I don't know where the time flew. So I worked across the industry, and currently I'm the president of really honored to be the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. I also sit on the Met Office board as a non-exec director, and I'm a trustee with Green Alliance, which is a think tank working in the environmental policy area. So I can
Very busy.
I can look at all of this, and I'm a visiting professor, hence the thing of professor. So it's basically but my passion is all around addressing the climate and nature emergency, but I just see it from different lens across all my different jobs.
Okay.
So hopefully I can share with you a bit more
Pick
holistic
one, and
view.
we'll get into. I mean,
Yeah.
with you being UK climate adaptation lead for Arcadis, what's happening with Arcadis around resilience right now?
So what resilience means to us is we take it as an opportunity. Of course, you can see all the scenes out there which David and Sarah showed. That is also the truth. It's going to get more severe. We all know that. But how do you, as in the midst of planning, whilst you're planning for resilience, there's so many co-benefits to achieve. So how do you look at it in an integrated fashion, that you're not just looking at adapting to climate, you're at the same time mitigating carbon, you're increasing biodiversity net gain, and you're doing it in a socially equitable way. And using digital, and as Paula mentioned, using it as an enabler to really speed up all this. But what we're looking at it is very much from a human-centric, and nature is at the heart of all of these solutions. And we realize that it's not just about physical resilience, it is very much a mental resilience. The mindset is very, very important. It's being, I think David and Sarah showed us in COVID, as we all experienced, we were not ready.
Yeah.
We were just mentally not ready. So I think the world we are getting into is we don't know. There could be more pandemics. We don't, just let's not say that we had a pandemic. We don't know about future. The way we have created the world, there'll be more viruses coming out. So, and we could get a climate emergency, which is we could get storms and winds and heat wave and this, and layered by a pandemic. So are we really prepared for looking at them in a layered fashion, having that scenarios, looking at scenarios? So what we are really keen to, what we are wanting to do is for, our clients and other organizations, firstly, looking at the assets. A lot of the organizations don't even know where their assets are. It's like, where are the assets? What are they at risk at? Then looking at the adapted pathways approach and looking at different scenarios and planning for those scenarios and having, what are the different, so if it's like a surge level, is it 0.5 meters, it's 1 meters, and then having solutions accordingly, or heat risk. Is it going to get 40 degrees for 1 week, or is it going to get a month? So having those solutions mapped across those risks, and then taking people with you. So I think the fundamental part which we miss in resilience is not take people on the journey. But some of the times we might not be able to protect them because it's unprecedented. But if people are ready mentally, they will be more with us on that. So I think it's about, even on a normal disruption, you see always images on BBC and everything. It's either gridlock or people are like scores of people on a train station. But we were having a round table in one of my presidential early careers thing, and one of our attendees said, people are okay to sit in a gridlocked road. I mean, they put up with it. But 5 minutes delay in our train gets really everyone up in arms. Like, 5 minutes? Oh, God, why is it? So I think it's the mental. Had we been communicated in a way like, you can have a cup of coffee, why don't you read a book? Or the communication system was really good, we could cope with it. But of course, there could be a medical emergency, and looking at the psychological part of it. I think it's Rory Sutherland, I think he was one of the speakers last year here in Interchange, thinking about the human behavior. It could be someone is just going to meet a friend casual, they don't mind being 5 minutes late, but it could be someone who's got a medical emergency, but are we having those systems in place to help them?
Yeah.
And I think one thing I would really say is in all of this, we are not looking at vulnerable customers. People who are not able, like if a disaster occurs, have we got plans in place how to get all of these people safe?
Yeah.
We don't. How do we use AI and digital capability to plan now where all those people are? So when something happens,
Let's get into that.
Get something into and really kind of plan for that.
Yes.
So that's one. And I think the second part is
And
very
Nusha, just got to get you to wrap up on that one so we
Sure.
can move on. We've got to hear from Theodora
Okay,
and
anyway, so
Alistair.
I can speak more,
And
but
we've got a
I'll let
discussion
you.
after.
So I think it's absolutely about asset management, really looking at your assets, planning and making it more like getting more funding on asset management. It might sound boring, but that's what's needed. It's definitely having a human-centric approach and also putting nature at the heart, because you can have a lot of nature-based solutions. I could talk about it whole
You
day,
could,
but
and we've got time. We will get into
I'll
it.
let other speakers speak.
Absolutely. Thank you. Really good points made, without a doubt. Theodora, you work for Tech UK. You're responsible for smart infrastructure and systems. So from your viewpoint, where is resilience with your organisation at the moment?
Thank you so much. Luckily, my colleagues have set out a lot of what I wanted to say in any case, so hopefully we'll keep it brief. Thank you so much for inviting us. Tech UK is a trade association that represents the digital tech sector, and we have over 1,000 members currently. Most of the global FTSE 100 companies, but also over 60% of our members are SMEs that work either in the UK or globally as well. I just want to flag something. I actually thought that the colleagues from PA Consulting had a great presentation. I can't believe that 60% of the executives think that there is nothing else to to do in climate resilience, but
it was a shocking statistic, actually, wasn't it? Yeah.
As Andrew mentioned earlier, I was absolutely face-smacked at COP28, and some statistics have still stayed with me since Dubai last year. So we're definitely off the road to 1.5 Celsius degrees increase in temperature. And in fact, if we reach 2 degrees, which is very likely, islands like Madagascar will lose 80% of their biodiversity, which is a lot. Other areas will impair people from seeking medical advice. A lot of women will have to give birth at home, so mortality rates will definitely increase. And we will see a lot of climate immigration or migration, which will create a lot of conflicts in various countries in the world. And I don't think this is kind of sinking to a lot of leaders that, as Anusha said, how would you manage people? And certainly transport providers also need to plan for those times and not kind of mitigate before things like this happen. But also, the good news is that there are a lot of ways to prevent that, and Paula mentioned some cases, so Hawaii is doing really well in mitigating some of those areas. I think we also, as kind of the global West, could take a lot of lessons from those islands and communities in the sense of how do we plan for infrastructure in the future. So, for example, the stress-free infrastructure degrees in the UK are very low, so that's why we see a lot of disruption on transport, which not only disrupts lives, but also disrupts the economy. We're losing GDP, transport providers are losing a lot of money. So I don't know how we are still not seeing that on the balance sheets. But yes, existing solutions are already there. The UK is a leader in artificial intelligence. I think we need to certainly take advantage of the skill sets, and some of the global tech leaders have decided to settle in this country and even bring talent and skilled workforce to work in artificial intelligence. So applying some of those solutions in the transport sector, I think it's hugely important. The Department for Transport is already creating an AI strategy. So some good news there, but also working together with different sectors. So my personal background is in energy, but working in infrastructure in general, and somebody mentioned earlier creating solutions for systems rather than one particular sector is going to be imperative. So thinking about how do you interact with energy, with the energy system, with the energy sector, how do you interact with different sectors to make sure that strategically you're rolling out not only better infrastructure, but the right infrastructure that is needed in the
something
country.
we're going to come to.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
going to ask you for your ideas on that. Thank you, Theodora. Thank you so much.
And
I'm going to take the opportunity to wrap you. I'm sure we're going to get more into conversation. Alice has been waiting patiently to just give your introduction and tell us where your view is in your role working with Arup. But thank you for the moment, Theodora. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Alice Howcroft. I'm Associate Director in Arup's Business and Investor Advisory team. So we work with infrastructure owners, operators and developers to finance and deliver infrastructure. Slightly unusually for an engineering firm, I'm actually a chartered accountant by profession, and financial advisor is my day job. So I definitely feel the weight of expectation to try and help address the funding challenge. And I do say try and address it rather than solve it, because I think that really is, to my mind, sort of one of the really tricky conundrums of the day. I think we all have a broad consensus that to meet 2050 climate targets and generally deliver increased resilience, that we need to invest more in resilience projects, and there are many pathways that we can get there. But I do think, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, I do think it does require the policy, the planning, the financial resources, and the implementation to all work together. Financial resources will always be a constraining factor, as they are in everyday life. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how economically viable or strategically important a project is seen to be. If it's not affordable, then in all likelihood it won't get done. So my interest is very much in making sure that sort of the financial resources side of things, the implementation and the commercialization of projects and solutions are considered right at the outset, alongside the policy and the planning. To use a film title reference, we can't do everything everywhere all at once. So how do we prioritize those financial resources against competing options, and how do we determine what really does matter, what really does count? So drawing on, I'm sure we'll come to it in the conversation, but we need to be more, how do we be as efficient as we can, drawing on digital tools and developments to help better spend the resources we have? How do we collaborate more across government departments and also across the public and the private sector to bring together the skills of both sectors? I'm probably going to stop there, actually, because try and catch up some time, but I'm happy to delve into questions.
Thank you, that's good, because yes, we are going to get some more into that around collaboration. But Theodora, you hit on it, talking about some of the data from COP28, and also referring back to PA's survey. I think it was 65% of leaders at the moment have lost their sense of urgency around resilience and what to do next. So what do we think then about whether or not some organisations are almost sleepwalking into the impact of climate change in terms of not doing enough? Paula?
Well, I think obviously one of the focus points, which is a great thing, is there's a lot of focus on decarbonisation, which we need to do incredibly urgently. But I think the majority of the funding is also at the moment going to decarbonisation, and there's a very small amount going to adaptation. And if you look at the IPCC report, it's actually saying the next 20 to 30 years of climate disruption is already locked in from existing emissions. So there is a huge gap between the amount of adaptation that we need to do and where we are today. So what were you asking? What would you want to know?
So absolutely decarbonisation is on the agenda, but it feels as if there are some organisations, some leaders who don't feel the urgency. They are lacking urgency. And so what ways do you feel that organisations can really step that up? And you've talked about what Google Cloud is doing and helping in the public sector.
The obvious thing is we're never going to get enough money. So even if we unlock lots of money, there'd still not be enough. So one of the things we can do is we can prioritise better, so we can understand where are the most severe risks, where are the most vulnerable people. But I actually think the IPCC report is a very good resource, but people don't like it because it's very dull. There's a wonderful workshop called the Climate Fresk, which I would recommend to everyone. I'm a facilitator, and it's a fun way of going through the IPCC report with cards and actually understanding the science of climate change, but also the human aspects of, how is it going to impact the world? And then you reflect on how you feel. And then you look at the scale of the problem, the order of magnitude, and then you plot out some actions. And I think we don't really talk about how we feel about climate change either. We block it out because it's overwhelming.
So it's a workshop. How can people access that if they've not heard of it?
If they just go to climatefresk.org, there are public-run workshops all the time.
Okay.
And many organisations also run them sort of internally as well.
Sure. Anusha?
I think the biggest blocker is the mindset and not enough bold leadership. We all say things we understand, but we don't do when it comes to actually doing things. Let's call it out. We talk about innovation, but when someone's trying to be innovative, we don't give them enough scope to be innovative. People who try to push boundaries are then seen as trouble. That's the culture in our industry. We are risk averse as an industry. We want to be different, we want to be like other industries, but the fact is we're not. And I think that's the biggest blocker.
What do you think is driving that, though?
I think it's just playing safe. It's just having evidence for everything. Like, I think we saw the statistics, till another disruption doesn't happen, it's not going to shake us up. I mean, but not looking up and looking around the world. I remember I was at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there was the stand on Pakistan, and they suffered devastating floods, and it says what happens in Pakistan doesn't stay in Pakistan.
Exactly.
That said a message, right? Do you remember? It was like, that's what it is. And forget Pakistan, Germany, so many people died. Netherlands, less people died. And because we are a Dutch company in Arcadis, so I know it's at the heart of what they do with flood risk management. So less people died because they were prepared for it. There's stakeholder engagement at every level. There's a community conversations happening. We're taking communities with us. But I think there is lack of bold leadership. There is, I think, the resistance to change. There is also, I think, the silos. We're saying we want to break silos, but we don't break them. We talk about systems thinking, but what does it mean in practice? Every document has systems thinking, but when we get it in practice, those hard silos, those hard boundaries, nobody's willing to break them. So I think what it needs is those unconventional partnerships. It's the mindset that we don't have to look at the government. I think, Paula, you said, don't look at the government. Sorry to say, it is chaotic at the moment. It will be chaotic for another year or two. But do we wait for them to give us direction, or do we just crack on with things?
Yeah.
Get all the partners together, and there's enough intelligence around partners. There's financial partners. Make connections with the financial partners, the bankers. They want their assets to be resilient. There's data. There's enough, data, of course, there's not enough data, but we have to work on collecting that data. And some of the boring tasks will need to be done. So we have to do, and it's a multi-pronged approach. But also don't forget the communities, because you know what? If there's a grid, for just a minute, the grid goes, all the apps will go. Yes, digital is hugely important. It's a big enabler. But have we got communities ready? Have we got the community support system if an event happens? What is it? Because that's when communities get together and look out for each other. I talk so passionately about resilience as I've seen 2 floods and a fire, so I know how it is. It's the communities who get together ultimately.
Yeah.
And are we making them strong,
Exactly. And I'm wondering how some of you want to respond, Tom, Ted, or Alistair. I wonder how you'd respond around the fact that, yes, there are uncertain times, and that very much came out of the keynote stage this morning, and that the reins from central government need to be loosened so that more locally solutions can be found. And Anusha, you talked about the lack of innovative thinking. So how then do you operate in that environment where there is uncertainty, but you know which priorities need handling? What do you practically have to do, Tom? What are you doing?
You couldn't lay this up more perfectly for me and my passions. Yeah.
That's great.
So I talk lots and lots and lots about a line of sight and how you connect organisational objectives, all the way down to what work you're doing right in the front line, or as Sarah said, in the basement. And so there are, I think, any organisation that is good at asset management or just really high performing in many different ways, like most UK infrastructure managers are, they've got some of that in place already. Right? They have some understanding of why they exist, what they're there to deliver, what level of service they're supposed to be delivering. And there's a connection back to your previous question, right, which was about how do you convince leadership that something needs to be done here? And I would argue that actually all of the conditions are in place already. Right? We had UK legislation 7 or 8 years ago, I think, that now forces all infrastructure managers in the UK, public or private or somewhere in between, to do vulnerability assessments, to take those a variety of different scenario models for the climate and consider what happens in those situations. And they've got to write reports and they've got to submit them to government for consideration. And so my company is involved with those certainly for the highway system and the rail system. And they're really good. But not everyone sees them, right? Just as you said about the other one, it's sometimes they're a bit boring, right? But we have to engage, right? You have to have your middle management take ownership of that kind of work to see that we've done some analysis. We have looked at what will happen if the 1 in 100 year flood level raises from there to there, and therefore how often are we going to see massive impacts to our infrastructure? And Alistair was talking before about business cases, right, and financial motivations. And how do you convince decision makers to invest? Right, it's a business case. It is not difficult at all for engineers and economists to take those kind of assumptions and turn them into a real pounds or dollars value to convince someone that something needs to be done. It requires a very slight shift in thinking from where it's you invest this and we think that we'll get this out and therefore there's a business case. We have to have just the smallest change in thinking to better understanding risks, which are, there is X% chance of this happening in the next 5 years, and therefore, if it happens, the cost is, I don't know, £100 million, and therefore we should assume that the cost is about, the potential cost is 5 million, and therefore how much are we going to invest to avoid that cost happening? Yeah, people do that sometimes already. Executives aren't always receptive to those arguments, but it is just a slight extension of our normal way of presenting business cases, and I think that's how you get the agreement, the urgency of action that you're going to address something.
Thank you. Where does the user, the real person, come into those calculations?
So I think do you want to?
Theodora, because you're talking outcomes, risk, business case, what about people?
Well, people are fundamental. I mean, we definitely have to design policy and solutions around people. Unfortunately, a lot of the private sector thinks about the balance sheet. So it's actually quite interesting that the logistics sector sees climate resilience as a commercial opportunity, and I think if that mentality is transitioned into other transport providers, that would be ideal. But there are some barriers to, to that. So a lot of analog systems still existing. Lack of behavior to change. So if things are ultimately working so far, let's not break it. I think central government has a huge role to play, especially in designing coherent policy between the different sectors. For example, we're trying to electrify transport, but at the same time, 40% of new projects that are in line to be connected to the energy grid in the UK have been given dates post-2030. And that is a huge amount of waiting time, which loses investment confidence in the country. We see a lot of international large renewable energy technology companies pulling out of the United Kingdom because of rising infrastructure costs, rising construction costs, and also Brexit has not helped in terms of talent and skills to be retained in the country. So I think if the transport sector is setting certain targets, it has to make sure that other sectors are also in line to deliver the infrastructure for those targets, such as electrification of transport, for example. And then public-private partnerships. We do have quite a lot of great technology in the country, but that behavioral barrier to adoption of digital technologies is still there. So artificial intelligence, digital twins, edge computing, quantum even, those are all emerging technologies that are moving a lot faster than transport providers could even comprehend.
What are the barriers then to people not using that? Is there a fear about this technology? Because obviously the headlines have been that the global tech leaders have gone, AI, you should be terrified, we're terrified. Is that one of the many barriers to
absolutely.
stopping companies adopting?
Cybersecurity is a huge challenge for people and organizations. Cybersecurity investment, so there is an upfront investment that you need to make, so a cost. Also, education and picking up the right technology for your business or for your challenge that you have. Local authorities specifically have that issue, lack of resources and understanding of what kind of technology they need to implement, what kind of procurement practices they need to also have to procure those technologies. So. But certainly, we see a lot of interesting new business models, for example, new public-private partnerships. Some of our tech companies are partnering with educational facilities like schools. Cisco, for example, is doing quite a lot in utilizing wireless information with climate and environmental impact assessments to work with schools to decarbonize school systems and provide also opportunity for peers to learn from those. We see, for example, Octopus Energy partnering up with Tesla. So you see some very interesting types of new business models there that will decrease the costs for the end consumer.
Alistair, you're talking about obviously that balancing conflicting priorities and ensuring efficiency and how you go about making those decisions. I mean, what drives you in terms of getting those priorities as right as you feel you can?
I think some of it comes back to the question you just raised. A lot of it, ultimately, the customer, or if it's a public good, flood defeat, there's no. It's kind of us as all citizens. It has to be driven from that starting point, and I think the benefit of having sort of local decision makers being in charge of prioritizing local spending. I think that is how we sort of address what is important to us locally. So I think it is having those levers at a local level, enough funding, but also those skills and resources at the local level to help frame what actually is our priority for our local area. It goes back to the sort of the constraint point. Is it flood defences because of a particular geographical area, and is it schools? Is it adult social care? What actually is it? So it is having those skills, I think, at the local level to really sort of put in place the policy and the planning and the framework to help prioritise. As I said, it's that bringing together of the policy, the planning, the financial and the actual implementation skills to be able to put in place the best solutions for the local citizen.
And obviously, we heard from Vernon and Henry and Bev this morning about the importance of devolution and local authority handling of decisions, but it's not clear, is it really, where money's going to come from, particularly as we know about the possible impending bankruptcy of other councils. So how do you operate in that environment, knowing what you need but not quite being able to get there?
There we go. There's the big question. Yeah, exactly. I think that is the challenge. I think someone said it before, that it's trying to get things done. We've got to try and do the best we can do with what we have. Yes, there's lobbying and there's the ongoing pressure that we can put on central government and others to sort of decentralise funding even more to local. But to the extent we have a framework in place, there's been a step towards with things like Crust funding and sort of larger single pots being devolved down. But to some extent, it just moves that constraint challenge to a different part in the system, and again, it comes back to those skills at the local level of how do we then prioritise this separate pot. So whilst we have a form of devolution and devolved funding, it's still quite centralised because that pot is still dependent on it being handed down. So it's I think it's just recognising that and putting in place the best the best systems and processes and governance structures that you can within that constraint to try and drive forward your priorities.
Yeah. Just going to turn out to the audience to see if anyone would like to ask a question of the panel. Hands up if you do, and we can get a mic to you. Ooh. Quieter than the audience this morning. Tons of people wanting questions. No? Okay.
Well, it is lunchtime.
Yeah, I suppose that's it. Everyone's thinking, oh, yes. What time is it? Let's have a look. You've all mentioned the need for cross-sector collaboration and planning, and Theodora, you gave some examples. How urgently is that required? What else have you seen? Paula, yeah.
I think it's very important because it's one of the things that unlocks the transformation. We heard in the presentation this morning about making us competitive, but in the context of our country, it's about our economy. And I think there are some wonderful ways that this could happen, and it could be trialled out on a small scale on a pilot. Initially, it doesn't have to be huge. And an obvious one for transport is the interlock with urban design. And when we look at extreme heat, things like green infrastructure and trees in cities make a big difference to both people and human health, and also the roads themselves and how they adapt to extreme heat. So I think there's some wonderful things using satellites, again, where you can actually monitor tree health. You can look at where the green infrastructure is in the city, and that can help both health, which is obviously one sector, urban design, and also transport. There's some very interesting cross-sector work with finance. So increasingly, insurance and banking are starting to have a look at land use, for example, and deciding, are we going to give people this loan? Are we going to give them the insurance? How are they fostering wildlife in their farm? Are they planting hedgerows? Or what is the thermal properties of the buildings today? Have they put insulation in? And some of those will go into the thought process of whether people get investment. And you can see that is a massive lever for change. And then I think another one that's very interesting is supply chain, because that is like the glue, isn't it? It's like the interconnection between everything. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot more work about how do we make supply chains more robust and more resilient.
Great. Anisha, you wear various hats, so you will have seen, I'm sure,
I'll just say I wanted to share something.
Pieces, yeah.
There's so many models around the world. And I think there's so much of, if we just see which model fits in, obviously it has to fit in our conditions, but what needs to change if we can change some of the governance or the way we think or the way our technical systems are geared up for. For example, in Hong Kong, you have the mass transit railway system. So that's one owner who owns the land, the building, the hotel, the settlements, the buildings around, and the whole transport. So they can really make those decisions, integrated decisions, so because it's one entity owning all that. So then people who are using that transport, using the hotel, the restaurants, the real estate space. I know TfL owns some of it, but I think if it was not segregated and it was like one entity owning, then it's much easier because it's less onerous to kind of, go across organizations, because each organizations have their agendas, even though each of our organizations say that we want climate resilience, sustainability, and all the rest, that the preamble is the same. But when you look underneath, everyone has their own terminologies, their own data systems. So I think learning from models around the world is really, really important. And I think, as the Paula said, putting blue-green infrastructure at the heart of all this is hugely important. And because that's when you get co-benefits. In a resource-constrained world, why wouldn't you want multifunctional infrastructure? So in Arcadis, we've got a project where we have got a dune, but there's an integrated parking within it. So there's a flood defense with an integrated parking. Similarly, if we are working at the EV strategy, we are looking at which all places you have, parking slots are being available. Don't just leave them for months and months like that. Use that land for sustainable urban drainage system or green it up. There's so many examples around the world, like Copenhagen, they've got a park they've called the Climate Park. During the day, it's like basketball park, but when an event happens, it can absorb the water. It's designed in a way that can take away the water. So it makes people who are cycling and walking, they are resilient, and let's not forget, transport is just not train, rail, airports. It's also ports, which is unseen. Yeah. If, like for ports, I think for winds, they're really well kind of, they are resilient, but for tidal surges, if like, especially an island city, country like UK, can you imagine if something happens at the port, the gridlock that happens and the logistics and most of our stuff, I don't think we think enough of that. It's integrated, looking at the whole value chain system, like where would be the gridlock? What's the single mode of failure? I think looking at it much wider and then looking at each risk. This should be, I'm so surprised that they're thinking disruption, and this should be the main thing, like, how we had health and safety, we were thinking, how do we keep people safe? This should be number one thing, and I'm surprised people are not looking at it. I think because all those people who are not, they need educating. And I think maybe not educating through our usual ways of giving them another document. I think we need the help of media, the communication, the advertising people to really bring it to the fore, like what needs to be done.
And demonstrate there.
And also show the benefits. It's not all doom and gloom. Like I said right at the start, whilst you're preparing, whilst you're making resilience, you're looking at the resilience dividend, which means, like what came out of COVID, unfortunately, so many people died, but what came out was us all working remotely. So I think having that mindset and thinking of all the benefits that can come, so not selling it as just like its cost of what, it will wipe off so many billions from economy.
But the benefits
That's
of
fine.
changing thinking and working.
Exactly. Making a city like Singapore, for example, I just absolutely love that. They have, local people, local volunteers sign up for something called, they can help people who are differently abled around the station. So thousands of people sign up for it and they have a different badge to help people. That's resilience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Resilience is not just huge events that happen. Resilience is also the day-to-day resilience you give to people. So I think it's looking at it from a human point of view, having that economy of care. Do we care? Do we care for everyone?
And it's interesting. It just makes me think, and you're talking about communication, and obviously I'm in the media business, and it makes you think about how far the industry, transport, road, rail, every sector of it, communicates the stories of innovation to people at home, who then can recognize that there is change happening, that there's hope, because I think a lot of people need hope.
Exactly.
That we're moving toward the targets that we are, and that they can get where they need to go safely.
And we should keep it as part of our daily soaps, like EastEnders should show this event happened and how did we save, and something good came out of it, but because they were they had prepared for it. I think we need to get all these things, societal, smoking, how smoking happened. Like, I think it needed all sorts of, solutions. It wasn't just a regulation. It needed cultural change. It needed so many things. I think that's how resilience is, building resilience every day for that unplanned event.
I tell you what, I'm going to get closing thoughts from you all, because I know, Theodore, you wanted to say something as well. So let's wrap these up in the closing thoughts then around the key messages that you want our audience here to take home around resilience. And I'm going to go Actually, I'm going to start with Alistair. Do something different. Start with Alistair. Closing thoughts, just a few moments, because we are very close to lunchtime.
On the spot now. I think I can't. I think as a chartered accountant, I can't help coming at things from the doomsayer point. But it's more the. I'm thinking more the pragmatism, like say, like looking at the optimism. I think. Again, I think ultimately, I think resilience underpins all our sort of infrastructure investments and priorities. Now, I think it's more thought of in terms of new build. It's very much all new build infrastructure has that at its heart. So I think just starting to I think to accept that we are moving in the right direction. It's probably not as quick as we would all like, yeah. But I think we are seeing very much the use of the digital tools and the new construction methods that are helping us to start down that track. And it's really just, I think, sort of increasing our collaboration to just try and help us move along that spectrum perhaps a little bit quicker.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. Theodora, headline thoughts to wrap up.
Many.
Just the one, top one, priorities.
But recently I heard this thing. So everybody, I think, in the room probably has heard that data is the new oil, which I hate that phrase. I think it's stupid. But if you see the oil industry and the infrastructure that has been built around the industry, the oil industry, with suppliers, with supply chain, the consumer, the creation of demand from industrial partners, if you see that infrastructure, how well it has developed in the multitude of investment, and if data is the new oil, where is the data infrastructure? So I think we can do much better in creating that infrastructure, because we have the data. We just have to channel it in between different sectors, partners, and to the right places at the right times.
Sure. Great. I'm going to leave it at that. That sounds like a good point to end on. Anusha, you take home for everyone.
Yeah, I think I would say just be honest. Don't think the general population is not intelligent. They are hyper-connected, they're intelligent, they understand things, so let's be honest. And even if there are things that you don't want to say, but take them with you on the journey is number one. Number two is be bold in your line of work, in whatever influence you can have. Try to, it's okay to make people uncomfortable on a project, because that's when change happens. And number three, I would say be inclusive. Look at everyone and have that agile mindset, because resilience is all about being prepared for an uncertain event. Yeah. And that uncertainty can be anything.
Absolutely. Paula.
Yeah. I think mine's very similar to what you said, really. But one of the things that we like to think about at Google is this moonshot mindset. So if we need to, achieve extraordinary things in short timescales, one of the things that we can do is to be very bold and to think about 10x thinking. So how can we make it 10 times better rather than 10% better? And I think the cross-sector is one of the levers to make that happen. But also we need to think about the user. We need to think about people, and it's really important that they're involved as part of this. Yeah, so I think those are the main things.
Great,
that I would
good
say.
people.
Yeah.
Yes, people at the heart of it. Absolutely. Yeah. Tom.
Exactly, that's going to be my point. I think our only hopes for achieving a resilient country, not just our transport or infrastructure, just overall, all comes down to the people. And I think we have to look in the mirror and say it's about our own competence. We need to be resilient people in this industry. We need to make sure we've got varied experiences, that we understand how our types of roles work in different sectors, or understand different types of role within our sector as well. We need to be multi-skilled, because we need to be the ones that identify the opportunities to make things better and to make it happen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, panel. Tom, Paula, Anusha, Theodora, Alistair. Absolutely fantastic.